The Haunting of Hollow Hill Cemetery. Chapter 1. The Town's Anticipation. On the eve of Halloween, Hollow Hill, a picturesque, small town tucked away in the heart of the countryside, hummed with an electrifying anticipation that spread like wildfire through its charming streets. The annual Halloween festival was the talk of the town, an event that drew everyone together for a night of enchanting revelry. Hollow Hill's residents had a special place in their hearts for this occasion, and the preparation for the celebration was nothing short of a spectacle. As the sun lazily descended behind the rolling hills that surrounded the town, the first traces of autumn's chill kissed the air. Leaves had already turned various shades of red, gold, and amber, blanketing the cobblestone streets in a mosaic of colors. The houses, adorned with pumpkins, ghostly decorations, and strings of twinkling orange lights, exuded a welcoming aura of festivity. In the town square, a massive, centuries-old oak tree stood tall, its gnarled branches casting eerie, elongated shadows in the fading daylight. Here, the heart of the Halloween festival would come to life. Booths were being set up, vendors arranged their wares, and children ran excitedly in their costumes, giddy with anticipation. The square would soon transform into a bustling hub of joy, laughter, and eerie delights. Yet, amidst the anticipation, there was an air of trepidation. For generations, Hollow Hill had whispered tales of the haunted Hollow Hill Cemetery. Legends spoke of restless spirits and eerie happenings that chilled the bravest of hearts. This year, a group of adventurous teenagers, looking to prove their fearlessness, had set their sights on dispelling these ghostly stories. They had decided to explore the enigmatic cemetery on the very night that fueled their town's deepest fears. As the sun painted the sky in shades of deep orange and fiery red, the group of teenagers met on the outskirts of town. The crimson hues of twilight cast long shadows over their eager faces, obscured by their costumes. Amelia, the spirited leader of the group, had donned a gypsy's attire, complete with a swirling skirt, jingling bangles, and a vibrant headscarf. Tom, her steadfast best friend, sported a ghostly sheet with blackened, hollow eyes, while Sarah and Ben, a pair of twins, wore matching vampire costumes that bore their mischievous grins. Their backpacks held essentials for a night of exploration: flashlights, snacks, and a small first aid kit, though they dared not admit to themselves that they might need it. The adventure was thrilling, for they were about to embark on a journey into the heart of darkness, or so the legends whispered. As the group moved towards Hollow Hill Cemetery, the last rays of sunlight vanished behind the hills, leaving a sense of foreboding in their wake. The night was filled with eerie quiet, broken only by the distant laughter and music of the festival in the town square. The cemetery, with its ancient, leaning tombstones, loomed before them like a forgotten realm, a place where time itself seemed to have paused, awaiting the arrival of the brave souls who dared to trespass on its spectral grounds. With each step they took toward the entrance, the teenagers could feel the weight of history and the whispers of the past surrounding them. The cemetery was rumored to be a place of lost souls, where the living and the dead intertwined in a dance of haunting mystery. The ominous atmosphere was undeniable, but Amelia's courageous spirit led them forward, for they were determined to prove that the tales of the Hollow Hill Cemetery were nothing but stories of old, fading into the autumn night. And so, as the clock ticked towards the bewitching hour, the group of teenagers ventured into the cemetery, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the crumbling tombstones, setting the stage for a Halloween night they would never forget. Chapter 2. A Sinister Decision. The Hollow Hill Cemetery, with its moss-covered gravestones and gnarled trees, greeted the teenagers with an eerie silence as they ventured deeper into its heart. The dim light of their flashlights cast flickering, elongated shadows on the aged tombstones. The night air was thick with anticipation, and the feeling that they were intruding into a world they scarcely comprehended. Amelia led the way, her gypsy costume rustling softly as she walked, her steps hesitant, yet resolute. Her companions followed closely, Tom's ghostly sheet brushing against the gravestones, Sarah and Ben's vampire cape swishing with each quiet step. They eventually arrived at a small clearing within the cemetery, where a particularly ancient and imposing mausoleum stood. Its stonework, once grand and intricate, had weathered centuries of wind and rain, leaving it in a state of decay that made it seem all the more ominous. "This is it," Amelia whispered, her voice barely louder than the gentle breeze rustling through the trees. She gestured towards the mausoleum, its dark entrance beckoning them. The group hesitated but quickly decided that this would be their base camp for the night. It seemed like an appropriate place to disprove the local legends. After all, if the spirits were here, they might make themselves known around such an ancient resting place. Inside the mausoleum, the air was heavy with the scent of damp stone. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and the only illumination came from their flashlights. Amelia spread out a thin blanket on the dusty floor, creating a makeshift campsite for the group. "We should stay here for the night," Tom suggested, taking a seat on the floor and leaning against the cold, damp wall. His eyes, now devoid of any trace of humor, scanned the room as if expecting something to jump out at any moment. As the minutes turned into hours, the tension in the mausoleum grew palpable. The distant sounds of the Halloween festival in the town square could still be heard, but they seemed worlds away, disconnected from the eerie solitude of the cemetery. Night fell completely, and the darkness outside the mausoleum deepened. It was then that the first strange occurrence unfolded. A faint, mournful melody drifted through the air, so ethereal that it seemed to emerge from the very stones themselves. The teenagers exchanged glances, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. "Did you hear that?" Ben asked, his voice quivering. Sarah shushed him, her eyes fixed on the mausoleum's entrance. "It's probably just the wind," she offered as an explanation. But the eerie melody continued, growing louder and more haunting. It was as if an invisible orchestra had awakened in the night, filling the air with a spectral symphony. Amelia rose to her feet, her expression determined. "Let's find out where it's coming from," she said, her voice now filled with a strange mix of courage and curiosity. The group cautiously stepped out of the mausoleum, their flashlights sweeping through the darkness, searching for the source of the haunting music. It led them deeper into the cemetery, and the shadows of the tombstones seemed to come to life, dancing to the spectral tune. As they followed the melody, they felt a growing unease, but dismissed it as mere superstition, attributing the eerie sounds to the tricks of the Halloween night. Little did they know that the cemetery held secrets far darker and more enigmatic than any ghost story, and their decision to explore it would soon lead them to the very heart of its haunting mysteries. Chapter 3: Eerie Encounters. The teenagers followed the haunting melody deeper into the cemetery, their flashlights cutting through the inky darkness. The spectral music seemed to echo off the tombstones and ancient trees, creating a disorienting atmosphere that sent shivers down their spines. As they moved further from the mausoleum, the air grew colder, and an eerie fog began to creep in, obscuring the graves like a shroud. Sarah clung tightly to her brother's arm, her eyes scanning the mist for any sign of movement. "This is just a Halloween prank, right? Someone's playing tricks on us," she suggested, trying to reassure herself as much as her friends. Ben, however, was less convinced. He could feel a presence, a weight in the air, that went beyond mere tricks and costumes. He pointed his flashlight towards a cluster of tombstones and gasped as he saw what appeared to be a shadowy figure moving among them. Did you see that? There's something there, Ben said, his voice trembling. Amelia, though filled with determination earlier, now felt a rising fear. She turned to Tom, whose ghostly costume now felt like an uncomfortable shroud. Tom, maybe we should go back to the mausoleum. This is getting really creepy. But Tom, despite his initial reluctance to enter the cemetery, was suddenly gripped by a strange sense of curiosity. Let's just see what it is, he said, his voice unsteady. The group cautiously approached the area where they had seen the shadowy figure. As they drew nearer, they heard whispers in the cold night air, ghostly voices speaking in hushed tones. The words were indistinct, but the voices seemed to carry a deep sadness, as if they were lamenting some long-forgotten sorrow. The fog thickened around them, and the whispers grew louder, forming a chorus of the damned. The teenagers' flashlights swept over the tombstones, revealing more shadowy figures. Some were weeping, others standing in silent vigil, and a few appeared to be reaching out as if seeking solace or release from their spectral existence. Amelia's confidence waned, replaced by a creeping dread. This can't be real, right? It's just our imaginations playing tricks on us. Tom, usually the voice of reason, had no comforting words to offer. He, too, felt the strange energy in the air, and it sent a shiver down his spine. In the distance, the mournful melody continued, echoing through the cemetery. The teenagers realized that they were surrounded by a multitude of lost souls, and the legend of the haunted Hollow Hill Cemetery was no longer just a tale of superstition. It had become an unsettling reality. As the group stood among the restless spirits, the realization of their predicament began to set in, and their once unwavering bravery wavered. They were now entangled in a web of eerie encounters that defied explanation, and their journey into the heart of the cemetery had taken a sinister turn, challenging the very essence of their courage. Chapter 4. Festivities in Full Swing. Back in the heart of Hollow Hill, the town's annual Halloween festival was in full swing, casting a warm and inviting glow over the town square. The cobblestone streets had come alive with a myriad of colors, from the warm orange of jack-o'-lanterns to the ethereal glow of paper lanterns swaying gently in the breeze. Laughter, music, and the tantalizing aroma of roasted chestnuts filled the air. Children dressed as witches, ghouls, and superheroes ran from booth to booth, their faces adorned with wide smiles and eyes filled with wonder. The festival was a testament to the unity of the town, a celebration that transcended age and generation. The centerpiece of the square was the town's ancient oak tree, its gnarled branches now adorned with strings of flickering orange lights. Underneath it, a stage had been set up for a live band, their lively tunes adding to the festive atmosphere. The townspeople, many in elaborate costumes, danced to the music, and the night was filled with a sense of enchantment and community. As the clock in the town square struck 11, the festival reached its peak, and the anticipation of midnight, the bewitching hour, grew. Unbeknownst to the festival goers, the enchanting celebrations were about to take a chilling turn. A heavy, opaque fog began to creep in from the outskirts of the town square. At first, it was a subtle mist, but it quickly thickened, casting an otherworldly pall over the festival. Conversations hushed, and laughter faltered as a sense of foreboding filled the square. The fog was unlike any other. It clung to the cobblestones and twined around the festivities, defying the gentle breeze. As it enveloped the square, the spectral music that had led the teenagers into the cemetery could faintly be heard, like a haunting echo. A few festival goers exchanged uneasy glances, and nervously scanned the mist for its source. Many assumed it was an elaborate special effect orchestrated by the town for a thrilling Halloween experience. But then, something far more unsettling began to occur. The figures from Hollow Hill Cemetery, those lost souls that the teenagers had encountered, emerged from the fog. Dressed in tattered, time worn clothing, they walked among the townspeople, their ghostly presence unnoticed by the revelers. As they moved silently through the square, their spectral hands brushed against the living, sending shivers down their spines. Some festival goers felt an icy breeze pass through them, a touch that left them with a profound feeling of unease. Unbeknownst to the townspeople, the boundary between the living and the dead had blurred, and the spirits had infiltrated the heart of the Halloween festival. The night, once filled with laughter and merriment, was slowly being transformed into an eerie, spectral experience, and the midnight hour was still drawing near. The festival goers, still unaware of the chilling presence that had invaded their celebration, continued to dance, sing, and revel in the festivities. But as the spirits from Hollow Hill Cemetery moved among them, the town's Halloween celebration was on the verge of an uncanny transformation, where the living and the dead would soon converge in an otherworldly dance of the supernatural. Chapter 5: Unveiling the Truth. As the eerie encounters continued in the cemetery, the teenagers were led back to the mausoleum, where they had established their makeshift camp. The fog outside had thickened, shrouding the tombstones and gravestones in an impenetrable mist. Fear had firmly taken hold of the group, and they huddled together inside the cold, stone chamber. Amelia, her gypsy attire now disheveled, examined the ancient diary she had found earlier. The diary, seemingly untouched by time, contained the writings of a long forgotten soul, its pages filled with faded ink and cryptic entries. As she turned the pages, she realized that the diary chronicled the history of Hollow Hill, and more importantly, the history of the cemetery itself. "This is incredible," Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible over the mournful cries that still echoed in the night. "This diary holds the key to the secrets of this town, and it explains why the spirits are here." Tom leaned in closer, peering over her shoulder to read the diary entries. As he read aloud, it became clear that the town had a dark and unsettling past that had been hidden from its residents for generations. The diary spoke of a curse that had been placed upon Hollow Hill centuries ago, a curse that was tied to the cemetery and the spirits that now haunted it. According to the diary, a powerful sorceress had been wronged by the townspeople, and in her rage, she placed a curse upon the town. As retribution, the curse bound the souls of the deceased to the cemetery, preventing them from finding eternal rest. These spirits were now trapped in a limbo between the world of the living and the world of the dead, forever seeking release from their torment. Amelia's voice trembled as she read the final entry in the diary. To break the curse, the sorceress decreed that the truth must be revealed, and the town's residents must confront the darkness that has long been buried. The teenagers exchanged uneasy glances, realizing the weight of their discovery. The legends of the haunted cemetery were not mere superstition. They were the echoes of a painful history that had bound the town in a web of sorrow and suffering. As the fog outside the mausoleum pressed in, the voices of the spirits grew louder, their lamentations echoing in the chamber. The teenagers knew that they had a crucial role to play in fulfilling the sorceress's decree. They needed to find a way to reveal the truth to the town and confront the darkness that had been concealed for far too long. The diary held the answers they needed, but it also hinted at the dangerous journey that lay ahead. To break the curse and free the trapped souls, the teenagers would have to unravel the mysteries of Hollow Hill's history and face the spectral forces that now surrounded them. With their newfound knowledge and a sense of purpose, The group of friends began to formulate a plan. They knew that the presence of the spirits had infiltrated the Halloween festival back in town, and the spirits were slowly revealing themselves to the unsuspecting townspeople. The teenagers understood that the hour of reckoning was at hand, and they were determined to unveil the truth and confront the darkness that had held Hollow Hill in its grip for centuries. Chapter 6: The Unholy Hour. Inside the mausoleum, as the teenagers came to terms with the weight of the curse that bound the spirits of Hollow Hill Cemetery, an eerie silence had fallen over the chamber. The whispers and mournful cries of the spirits outside had grown more desperate, their presence now an undeniable reality that seeped into the very walls of the stone structure. Amelia clutched the ancient diary to her chest, her eyes reflecting the uncertainty that had settled upon the group. "We have to do something," she said, her voice filled with determination despite her trembling hands. "The spirits are seeking justice for the wrongs done to them in the past." Tom nodded in agreement. "We can't just stand by and let this continue. It's our responsibility to find a way to put them to rest." Ben and Sarah, who had been holding on to each other for support, understood the gravity of the situation. The spirits, once dismissed as mere superstition, were now very real, and they were driven by a relentless desire for resolution. As the minutes ticked away, the fog outside the mausoleum grew denser, making it nearly impossible to see beyond a few feet. The spectral music and the whispers of the spirits were unrelenting, like a mournful choir that surrounded the teenagers. Panic began to set in. The once unwavering courage of the group had wavered, and the reality of their predicament weighed heavily on their shoulders. They were trapped in a cemetery filled with restless souls, and the boundary between the living and the dead was blurring with each passing moment. "We need to find a way to communicate with them, to understand what they want," Amelia said, her voice quivering. She flipped through the diary, searching for clues that might provide insight into how to break the curse. Tom examined the mausoleum's cold, stone walls, searching for any hidden messages or symbols that might shed light on the spirit's demands. "Perhaps there's a way to make amends for the wrongs done in the past." The teenagers huddled together, trying to devise a plan to address the spirit's grievances and put them to rest. The eerie cries of the lost souls outside grew louder, and it was clear that the spirits were growing more impatient, their spectral forms moving closer to the mausoleum. Suddenly, an idea struck Amelia. She turned to her friends, her eyes filled with a newfound resolve. "The diary mentioned that the truth must be revealed to break the curse. Maybe if we share the history and the sorceress's decree with the town, we can set the spirits free." The group nodded in agreement, realizing that they had a vital role to play in the unfolding events. They would have to venture back to the Halloween festival, now shrouded in the thick fog, and reveal the long-buried truth to the town's residents. As the group prepared to leave the mausoleum, the fog outside began to part, revealing the shadowy figures of the spirits, their presence more palpable than ever. The boundary between the living and the dead had blurred, and the unholy hour was approaching. The teenagers knew that their journey was far from over, and the spirits' quest for justice had become entwined with their own, leaving them no choice but to confront the darkness and seek a way to put the restless souls to rest. Chapter 7: The Battle Begins. The fog that had blanketed Hollow Hill's town square began to part, revealing the eerie figures of the spirits from the cemetery. As the boundary between the living and the dead blurred, the townspeople at the Halloween festival were oblivious to the supernatural forces that now surrounded them. Laughter and merriment continued, but a growing unease lay beneath the surface. The spirits, clad in tattered, time-worn garments, moved silently among the revelers, their ghostly presence unnoticed. Some townspeople felt an icy breeze pass through them, while others were unaware of the spectral touch. As the spirits continued their solemn procession, their mournful cries and whispers grew more pronounced. Near the ancient oak tree in the town square, a group of children in costume played a game of tag. As they ran, their laughter ceased, and they suddenly froze in their tracks. They stared, wide eyed, at the figure of a woman in a tattered white gown who had appeared before them. Her long, raven black hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her eyes were filled with an indescribable sadness. The children, trembling, were unable to look away as she reached out a spectral hand, her touch sending a chill through their young souls. At the festival's refreshment stand, a couple in matching vampire costumes laughed as they ordered cotton candy. Just as they reached for their sugary treat, a man in 18th century attire materialized beside them. His eyes held an intense sorrow, and he gestured toward the cotton candy, a mournful longing in his gaze. The couple, feeling an inexplicable presence, exchanged puzzled glances before hurriedly leaving their confectionery behind. Meanwhile, the teenagers who had ventured into Hollow Hill Cemetery were on their way back to the festival, guided by a newfound sense of purpose. They had uncovered the truth about the curse that had bound the spirits to the cemetery and the town, and now they were determined to share it with the townspeople. As they approached the town square, they realized the extent of the supernatural forces at play. The spectral figures had become more numerous, and their presence was impossible to ignore. The fog hung heavy in the air, and the mournful music and whispers of the spirits reverberated throughout the square. Amelia, Tom, Ben, and Sarah exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear that the spirits were not content to remain hidden in the shadows any longer. They were seeking justice for the wrongs done to them in the past, and their restless souls were determined to make their grievances known. The teenagers stepped into the town square, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the cobblestones. The festival goers, caught in the merriment of the night, had yet to notice the otherworldly presence that had descended upon their celebration. The teenagers knew that they had to act quickly to reveal the truth and fulfill the sorceress's decree. Amelia raised her voice, her words trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. Listen, everyone! There's a curse that has bound the spirits of Hollow Hill Cemetery for centuries. They're seeking justice for the wrongs done to them, and we have to make amends to set them free. The festival goers turned toward the teenagers, their expressions a mix of confusion and disbelief. But as the fog continued to part, revealing the spirits who had gathered around the square, the truth became undeniable. The town was about to confront a chilling revelation that would forever change the course of Halloween in Hollow Hill. The spirits, their mournful cries and whispers growing louder, reached out to the living, their spectral hands brushing against the townspeople, their eyes filled with longing for resolution. The boundary between the living and the dead had blurred completely, and the unholy hour had arrived. As the town square descended into an eerie silence, the battle between the living and the dead was about to begin, and the fate of Hollow Hill hung in the balance. Chapter 8: Confronting the Past. As the eerie silence descended upon the town square, the festival goers stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the spectral figures that had materialized among them. The spirits, their mournful cries and whispers hauntingly audible, reached out to the living, seeking to communicate their long-buried grievances. It was an otherworldly tableau, a surreal moment that had transcended the bounds of reality. Amelia, Tom, Ben, and Sarah, the group of teenagers who had ventured into Hollow Hill Cemetery, stood at the center of the square, their flashlights casting long, wavering beams of light in the thick fog. Their voices had broken the festivity's spell, revealing the curse that bound the spirits to the cemetery and the town. The revelation had shattered the illusion of a carefree Halloween night. The townspeople, their faces etched with disbelief and unease, began to murmur and exchange anxious glances. The truth was unsettling and uncomfortable, for it was a mirror to the dark history of Hollow Hill, a history that had remained concealed for generations. Amelia spoke once more, her voice shaking with a newfound conviction. The spirits here seek justice for past wrongs. To set them free, we must confront the darkness that has long been buried in our town's history. The townspeople, forced to confront their fears and the town's dark past, knew that there was no escaping the truth. The spirits had become a tangible reminder of the town's transgressions, and the unsettling reality was laid bare before them. As the fog began to dissipate, the spectral figures of the spirits became more defined, revealing the anguish and sorrow that had trapped them in limbo for centuries. Their faces bore the weight of unspoken sorrows, and their eyes held a desperate plea for resolution. The town's residents, some visibly shaken, began to recognize the spirits as individuals who had lived in Hollow Hill in the past. Faces from history emerged from the spectral crowd, and memories of past transgressions and wrongdoings resurfaced. One by one, the townspeople came forward, sharing their recollections of the past. Stories of betrayal, deceit, and unforgivable actions were revealed, their painful truths echoing through the square. It became apparent that the spirits were tied to these unresolved conflicts, and their presence was a testament to the darkness that had festered within the town's history. As the townspeople confronted their past, they began to understand the significance of the spirits' quest for justice. The curse that had bound the souls of the deceased to the cemetery was not a mere superstition, but a tangible manifestation of the town's collective guilt and the need for retribution. The teenagers, guided by the ancient diary's wisdom, played a vital role in guiding the revelations and encouraging the townspeople to come to terms with their history. The truth had emerged, shedding light on the spirits' anguish and why they remained trapped in Hollow Hill. As the night wore on, a sense of catharsis began to permeate the town square. The living and the dead had, in a sense, reconciled with the past. The spirits, their spectral forms growing fainter, seemed to find a measure of peace, their mournful cries softening. The battle between the living and the dead was not one of violence, but of understanding and reconciliation. The townspeople had confronted the darkness that had haunted Hollow Hill, and in doing so, they had taken the first step toward releasing the restless souls. The boundary between the living and the dead had begun to mend, and the unholy hour was coming to an end. The town's history had been laid bare, and the spirit's quest for justice had been heard. The night was far from over, and the journey to set the trapped souls free was still fraught with challenges. But the town of Hollow Hill had taken a crucial step on the path to redemption and healing. Chapter 9: The Showdown. The town square of Hollow Hill was illuminated by the moonlight as the fog continued to dissipate. The boundary between the living and the dead had begun to mend, but the spirits, though softened by the revelations, still sought resolution. The night was far from over, and the townspeople knew that a climactic showdown awaited. The spirits, their spectral forms now faint and translucent, gathered at the center of the square. Their mournful cries had transformed into a chorus of anguish, a last plea for release. The town's residents, having confronted their fears and the dark history that bound the spirits, stood at the outskirts of the square, their faces etched with determination. Amelia, Tom, Ben, and Sarah, the group of teenagers who had ventured into Hollow Hill Cemetery, stood at the forefront, armed with the ancient diary's knowledge and a newfound sense of purpose. They were joined by the townspeople, who, having shared their painful stories and transgressions, were now willing to work together to confront the vengeful spirits. The showdown began as the spirits, driven by their desire for justice, advanced toward the living. The boundary between the worlds was still fragile, and the spectral figures moved with an ethereal grace that belied their power. Amelia, her voice steady and resolute, addressed the spirits. We understand your pain, your anguish, and the injustice that has bound you here. We are here to help you find peace, to break the curse that has held you captive for centuries. The spirits, their mournful eyes fixed on Amelia, hesitated. The town's residents, emboldened by the knowledge of the spirits' history and their own past wrongdoings, moved forward, bridging the gap between the living and the dead. One by one, the townspeople confronted the spirits, acknowledging their own part in the town's history of transgressions. Apologies were offered, and long buried grievances were laid to rest. The atmosphere in the square shifted, and a sense of forgiveness and reconciliation began to prevail. The teenagers, using the ancient diary as a guide, encouraged the townspeople to take collective responsibility for the town's history. They devised a plan to break the curse that had trapped the spirits in limbo, a plan that required the entire town's participation. As the clock struck midnight, a profound transformation began. The boundary between the living and the dead, which had once been blurred and fragile, began to solidify. The spirits, their spectral forms growing even fainter, showed signs of release. Their mournful cries turned into whispers of gratitude. Amelia, her gypsy attire now symbolizing the wisdom and compassion of the living, stepped forward. Together, we have confronted the darkness that has haunted our town. Together, we can break the curse and set the spirits free. The townspeople, united by a shared history and a collective commitment to redemption, gathered around the spirits. They joined hands, forming a circle of unity that transcended the boundary between the worlds. With each passing moment, the spirits grew less substantial, their spectral forms gradually fading into the moonlit night. As the night drew to a close, the spirits, their mournful presence now nearly imperceptible, let out a final sigh, like a breath released after centuries of anguish. The curse that had bound them was broken, and their souls found the peace they had long sought. The boundary between the living and the dead had solidified, and Hollow Hill was forever changed. The showdown between the living and the dead had culminated in a victory of understanding, reconciliation, and redemption. The town of Hollow Hill, once shrouded in the darkness of its past, now stood in the light of a new beginning, where the living and the dead could coexist in harmony. The curse was broken, and the spirits had finally found their rest. The night had come to an end, and as the sun began to rise over Hollow Hill, its residents knew that their town had been transformed by the events of that Halloween night. The past had been confronted, and a brighter future awaited, where the spirits of Hollow Hill could rest in peace, and the town's history would be one of healing and forgiveness. Chapter 10: The Dawn of Redemption. As the last echoes of the spirits' anguish faded into the night, the town square of Hollow Hill was bathed in the soft, early light of dawn. The boundary between the living and the dead had solidified, and the curse that had plagued the town for centuries had been broken. The town's residents had faced their darkest fears and triumphed over the forces of the unknown. The air was filled with a profound stillness, a sense of reverence for the transformative events of the Halloween night. The townspeople, their faces marked by the weariness of the night's trials and the release of pent-up emotions, gathered in the town square. The teenagers, who had played a pivotal role in revealing the truth and guiding the town toward redemption, stood at the forefront. Amelia, her gypsy attire now symbolizing wisdom and compassion, addressed the gathered residents. We have faced our darkest fears and confronted the history that has haunted our town. With courage and determination, we have laid the spirits to rest and broken the curse that bound them for centuries. The townspeople, united by a newfound sense of community and shared responsibility, nodded in agreement. The weight of the town's history had been acknowledged, and a sense of healing and renewal began to take root. The dawn had broken on a new day, one filled with the promise of redemption and the potential for a brighter future. The spirits of Hollow Hill, once trapped in a cycle of anguish, had found their long awaited peace, their spectral forms dissolving into the ethereal light of morning. As the townspeople contemplated the events of the Halloween night, they understood that the journey of healing had just begun. They knew that they would need to continue to acknowledge the town's history and work toward reconciliation, both with each other and with the spirits of the past. The teenagers, who had served as catalysts for the town's transformation, were hailed as heroes. Their courage and determination had led the way, and their actions had bridged the gap between the living and the dead. They had helped to set in motion the dawn of redemption for Hollow Hill. With the curse broken, the town's history could now be rewritten, one of healing and forgiveness. The past had been confronted, and a path to a brighter future had been opened. The festival grounds, once shrouded in fog and spectral figures, were now bathed in the gentle morning light. The decorations, though tattered from the night's events, seemed to take on a new life, a symbol of the town's resilience and the enduring spirit of Halloween in Hollow Hill. The townspeople began to disperse, returning to their homes and taking their first steps on the journey of healing. The memory of that Halloween night, when the living and the dead had come face to face, would forever be etched in the town's history. The spirits of Hollow Hill, once tormented souls seeking justice, had found their peace, their presence no longer a source of sorrow, but a reminder of the town's capacity for redemption. The curse had been broken, and a new chapter in Hollow Hill's history had begun. As the sun continued to rise, its warm rays bathing the town in light, Hollow Hill embraced the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The dawn of redemption had arrived, and the town's residents were ready to face the challenges of healing and forgiveness with renewed courage and determination.